Welcome to Shad's Guitar Show. Whether it's the gear or the players who made the gear famous, join me each episode as we discuss all things guitar. Well, hey there, and welcome into another exciting episode of Shad's Guitar Show. As always, I'm so glad that you're joining me. Last episode, we talked about the Super Strat, which is kind of going to lay the groundwork for this episode, which goes a little deeper. I had mentioned in the last episode that I acquired a Ibanez JEM, the Steve Vai signature Ibanez. This one's from 2004, and it's just such a killer guitar. I've been having so much fun playing it, and I really wanted to kind of go back in time and kind of understand the story of the JEM and sort of how Ibanez got involved with Steve Vai and sort of why he designed it the way he designed it, and just sort of understand the JEM model. And I thought you guys might find it interesting as well. So without further ado, let's dive into the JEM, Steve Vai, and the guitar that changed everything. All right, so today we're taking a look at one of the most visually striking, mechanically wild, and frankly just flat out cool electric guitars ever built. The Ibanez JEM. Now, I would say it's pretty unlikely that you don't already have a picture of this guitar in your mind. I mean, we've all seen Steve Vai, whether you've seen him live or on videos, or just flipping through a guitar magazine or online, social media, whatever the case might be. In the late 80s through now, you already have that picture in your head. Now, in the early days, we might have been looking at a neon-colored body with the monkey grip, and the vine that goes up the fretboard and the edge tremolo system. And not much has changed in terms of the aesthetic of the guitar, but now typically we see them in white or black. And the cool thing about the JEM is it wasn't born in some corporate design meeting. It didn't come out of a focus group. It came out of one guy's total unapologetic refusal to play a guitar that wasn't exactly what he wanted, and the company that eventually built it. They were so desperate, they were willing to say yes to a hole in the body called a monkey grip and 3 day-glow colors at a time when those things were considered basically insane. Before we get into Steve Vai and the JEM, we need to talk about Ibanez because the state the company was in the mid-1980s is actually crucial to understanding why this guitar happened at all. Ibanez goes back further than most people realize. The name actually traces all the way to the 19th century Spain, a luthier named Salvador Ibanez, who built classical guitars in Valencia. His workshop was eventually destroyed during the Spanish Civil War in the late 1930s, and that's when the Japanese Hoshino company, who had been importing his instruments, stepped in and started making guitars themselves under the Ibanez name. By the late 1950s, Ibanez was building electric guitars for export, and by the late 60s and into the 70s, they became well known, or maybe infamous depending on who you ask, for producing very convincing copies of American guitars. Gibson Les Pauls, Fender Stratocasters, ES335s. Ibanez made their own versions, and the quality was so good that Gibson actually took them to court over the headstock designs. The whole chapter became known loosely as the lawsuit era. After settling the lawsuit in 1978, Ibanez pivoted. They started focusing on original designs. Jazz guitars for George Benson, the musician, the artist series, and some genuinely interesting stuff. But none of it cracked the mainstream rock market in any big way. Then the Super Strat era hit. Eddie Van Halen essentially rewired what a rock guitar was supposed to be. A Stratocaster body, humbucker, locking tremolo, made for speed and aggression. Companies like Kramer, Charvel, and Jackson, as we talked about last time, obviously dominated that space in the early to mid-80s. Ibanez was basically watching from the sidelines. But by 1986, they were frankly struggling. Business was in a slump, and they needed something, or someone, to change the conversation. That's when Rich Lasner, who headed up the Artist Relations Department for Hoshino USA, set his sights on a young guitarist who was starting to make some serious noise. Steve Vai, by 1986, had already lived several guitar lives. He spent years as Frank Zappa's go-to guy, or stunt guitarist, which, if you know Zappa, means you were doing things on guitar that most players couldn't even conceive of. he transcribed Zappa's most complicated scores while he was still a teenager, which is just absurd. Then he went on to play with David Lee Roth after Roth split from Van Halen, and suddenly Vai was one of the most visible guitarists in the world. But all along he had a problem. He couldn't find a guitar that did exactly what he needed. Vai had grown up loving Zeppelin. He talked about hearing Plant and Page for the first time as a kid and just being completely undone by it, and watching how Zappa approached instruments, modifying them, changing them out, wiring them differently, and it gave Vai an early education in treating a guitar as a tool that should be shaped to your playing, not the other way around. By the time he was working with Roth, he was playing modded Charvels and Jacksons, and he kept finding himself in the garage, so to speak, doing things to these guitars that no manufacturer would sanction. One of the most telling examples, Vai hated that most tremolo systems wouldn't let you bend strings upward, only dive forward. The standard Floyd Rose would go down all day long, but pull up? No way. The bridge would bottom out. So Vai literally took a hammer and a chisel to the body of one of his Charvel guitars and just started chiseling out the wood behind the bridge to create a cavity that would let the tremolo arm pull back further. He called it the lion's claw route, and it worked. It certainly wasn't pretty, but yeah, it worked. He also had 24 frets on his custom guitars at a time when most production instruments stopped at 21 or 22. And he scalloped the top 4 frets, filing them down between the frets so your fingertips don't actually touch wood, just the string. It's a technique associated very heavily with Yngwie Malmsteen. Gives you this very intense, expressive control over pitch, and Vai wanted it. He also wanted a deeper cutaway so he could actually reach those 24 frets without his hand jamming into the body. He wanted specific pickups, DiMarzio PAF Pros, which he basically decided on before he even talked to the guitar company. He wanted a pickup configuration that could give him both the heavy humbucker tones and the glassy bell-like strat in-between sounds. And he worked out a wiring scheme with DiMarzio's Steve Blucher, where positions 2 and 4 of the 5-way switch would split the humbuckers and combine them with the middle single coil. He wanted all of this in a guitar that was also just visually wild. And that last detail, the famous monkey grip, tells you everything you need to know about Steve Vai's design philosophy. He said he wanted to include one feature that was so distinctly his own that no other company would ever try to copy it, because to do so would be an obvious ripoff. The monkey grip was that feature. Now, Vai took this vision to several manufacturers, and most of them came back with essentially their standard model with his name printed on the headstock, which is kind of a recurring story in the signature guitar world. And Vai wasn't having it. Rick Lasner at Hoshino USA had been watching Vai's trajectory and saw an opportunity. He and an expert named Mace Bailey put together a speculative prototype, essentially a guitar they built based on information that they had gotten from Steve and the guitars he was already playing, and they arranged a meeting. When Lasner brought those 2 prototypes to show Vai, something immediately and unusual happened. He laid the first guitar on the table, and Vai didn't even play it. He took it apart. He pulled the neck off, took the tremolo out, got the pickguard off, just completely disassembled it right in front of the Ibanez guys. Lasner, by his own account, was kind of stunned, but Vai looked up at him and said, essentially, "Relax, this is what I do to every guitar." He wanted to understand how it was built. He put it back together, checked it out. This is a great guitar. Well done. Ibanez had an edge here that the other manufacturers hadn't shown. They were willing to actually follow through on everything Vai wanted. The monkey grip? Fine. The Dayglow colors? Sure, why not? The custom wiring, the lion's claw route, the scalloped upper frets? Yeah, they built it. Lasner and Vai left that meeting with 1 guitar each. And those 2 instruments were, according to Lasner, essentially 90% of what the production guitar became. Within a few months, Mace Bailey flew to Japan and sat in the factory with the craftspeople there, supervising the production of 10 refined samples. So let's talk about the JEM name and the modeling, because they're all JEM 7s. The model numbering uses the number 7 because of Vai's personal attachment to it. He's talked at length about his relationship with the number 7. its significance in numerology, the fact that he's put the seventh song on each of his albums as a slow devotional ballad. The JEM 777 designation reflects that. 3 sevens. And that first run of Loch Ness Green JEM 777s was a limited edition of 777 guitars, each hand-signed and hand-numbered by Vi. The guitar launched at the Summer NAMM show in Chicago in June of 1987, and Ibanez wasn't shy about the presentation. The JEM was kept completely hidden behind a blank shroud with a security guard watching over it at all times, building anticipation before the reveal. When they dropped the shroud off of the guitar, simultaneously Steve Vai jumped up on stage hoisting another JEM over his head for everyone to see, and it was a pretty spectacular presentation. Alright, so let's take a minute to really dive into the nuts and bolts of the model and talk about all of the features. So the early JEM models had bodies made of basswood, which sounds like a minor detail, but it was actually a first. The JEM was one of the very first mass-produced electric guitars built from basswood as a standard material. Ibanez chose it for the tone, but also for the weight. They got the guitar down to around 7 pounds, and for a guy who was regularly swinging it around on stage, that was a big deal. The neck was a thin, fast maple profile, 19 millimeters deep at the nut, with a 15.75-inch radius and 24 jumbo frets. The upper 4 frets, from the 21st to the 24th, were scalloped. When you scallop a fret, you remove the wood between the frets so your finger is floating above the fingerboard and your whole fingertip pressure goes into the string. The control you get is extraordinary, but it takes some adjustment if you're not used to it. The tremolo system was the Ibanez Edge, and it was a genuine leap forward. It addressed almost every practical complaint about the Floyd Rose. The stud lock posts kept everything in place, the arm pushed in snugly instead of spinning loose, and the overall construction was tight and reliable. Combined with the lion's claw route in the body, you could do massive upward pitch bends that simply weren't possible on most production instruments. The pickups, 3 DiMarzios, 2 PAF Pro humbuckers, and a custom JEM single coil in the middle, were wound specifically for this guitar. And the wiring, as Vi had designed it, gave you 5 distinct sounds. 2 positions of straight humbucker, 2 coil split positions that combine the split humbucker with the middle single coil for that Stratocaster shimmer, and a middle-only position. Vi wanted the whole tonal spectrum in one guitar, and he got it. Then there was the visual stuff. 3 color options for the first run: Loch Ness Green, Shocking Pink, and Desert Sun Yellow. Ibanez had been nervous about the Dayglow approach. It was definitely not conventional. But Vi was insistent, and it turned out to be part of what made the guitar impossible to ignore. These were colors that commanded attention across the arena. And the fretboard inlays, well, this is something Ibanez added without Vi initially requesting it. The Tree of Life inlay, that sweeping floral vine that covers the entire fingerboard in abalone and pearl, was the Japanese craftspeople's contribution to the guitar. Vi had said it was one of those details he didn't ask for, but absolutely loved when he saw it. It became one of the most iconic visual signatures of the whole JEM line. When the JEM and Steve Vai hit the scene in 1987, it gave Ibanez a credibility and coolness in the mainstream rock market that just hadn't been there before. Vi was everywhere. Magazine covers, MTV, touring, and that neon JEM was right there with him. And it became a total statement guitar. But the real long-term business impact came from what launched alongside the JEM and benefited from the momentum: the RG550. The RG was essentially a JEM without the signature specific features: no monkey grip, no scalloped frets, and no wild colors or Tree of Life inlay. But it had the same wizard neck, the same edge tremolo, the same HSH pickup routing. It was, in a word, accessible. The JEM drew attention, but the RG series sold in huge numbers and became one of the best-selling guitar lines in history. Ibanez has said that the RG is second in worldwide annual sales only to the Fender Stratocaster, which is a staggering statement when you think about how different the world looked in 1986. And then Kramer collapsed at the end of the decade. The company that had dominated the Superstrat market in the 80s went under just as Ibanez was hitting its stride. The JEM itself kept evolving through the years. New finishes, the floral pattern with pink pickups, the multicolor swirl, a version with Vi's actual blood mixed in the finish, a 20th anniversary model with an acrylic body and LED lighting. In 1990, Vi and Ibanez took another giant leap, the Universe, a 7-string electric guitar, the first ever offered commercially by a major manufacturer. Vi had been experimenting with the concept, wanting access to lower register notes without dropping tuning. The Universe opened up a whole new sonic territory. And when bands like Korn picked up the 7-string guitars in the mid-90s, it lit a fuse that's still burning in heavy music today. And Vi's personal gems, the ones he actually plays, have become their own kind of legend. His white gem, called Evo, is one of the most recognizable guitars in the world. It's beat up, scratched, has had the neck replaced twice. It's a guitar he's used for decades on recording and touring, and it looks like it's been through a war. Ibanez even released a limited reproduction of it, scratch for scratch, dent for dent, with a simulated neck crack matching the actual crack in the original. They put tape near the neck pickup because the original had tape there. The attention to detail is borderline obsessive. And I mean that as a compliment. I want to step back for a second and put the JEM in context, because I think there's a bigger story here than just, here's a cool guitar. The signature guitar model had been around for a long time. Les Paul had his name on a Gibson. Chet Atkins had his Gretsch. But those were largely about putting a famous name on a guitar that was already close to what the company was making anyway. The JEM was something different. It was a guitar built from the ground up to one player's exact, uncompromising specifications. Specs that included things that the company initially didn't even really want to do. Vi has said that when he approached Ibanez, his expectations were essentially zero. He thought he was designing a guitar for himself. He didn't imagine anybody else would want it. And that absence of commercial calculation is probably what makes the guitar so interesting. He wasn't asking for what he thought the market wanted. He was asking for what he wanted, and it turned out that a lot of other people wanted it too. The monkey grip, the Dayglow colors, the lion's claw, the tree of life. These weren't compromises. They were vision in full. And when Ibanez delivered it without watering it down, they got something genuinely rare. A signature guitar that truly reflected the artist it was named for. The JEM has been in continuous production since 1987, nearly 4 decades. Almost no non-vintage guitar designs from the post-1950s era can say that. The Stratocaster and the Les Paul are landmarks, and those are from the early to mid-50s. The JEM is in some very unusual company. In 2020, Vi launched a new model, the Pia, named after his wife, Pia Maciano, which takes the JEM DNA and pushes it forward. The pedal grip replaces the monkey grip. New DiMarzio Utopia pickups. Refined body contours. The blossom inlay evolving the tree of life. It's a continuation of the same conversation Vi has been having with Ibanez since 1987. How do we make this thing better? And what I love about that, from a guitar nerd standpoint, is that it suggests that the JEM isn't a relic from the 80s shred era. It's a living design still being refined by the person who ultimately dreamed it up. So that's the story of the Ibanez JEM. A guitar born out of frustration, built by a company that was desperate enough to say yes to all of it, and unleashed on the guitar world in 1987, in 3 colors that nobody had ever put on a production instrument before. If you're a Vi fan, I hope this gave you some new context for the guitar you probably already love. And if you've never really dug into his work, I encourage you to start with Passion and Warfare, the 1990 album. It's the JEM in its natural habitat, and it still sounds like something from another dimension. As I'm wrapping this episode up, I'm actually staring at my JEM right now. So I'm going to finish this episode up and go play my guitar. And before you sign off from wherever you're listening, please go and leave me a 5-star review, wherever that might be. And also, the next time you're on YouTube, go to Shad's Guitar Show and subscribe. And when you're on Instagram, make sure you're following Shad's Guitar Show. And remember, the best guitarist is the one who's having the most fun.